This Sunday, criminal charges. The January 6th committee is considering voting on at least 3 criminal charges against Donald Trump.
Donald Trump's role was far more central to these events than merely inciting them.
The committee could recommend the Justice Department charge Trump for the potential crimes of insurrection, obstruction, and conspiracy.
Each of these efforts to overturn the election is independently serious. Each deserves attention both by Congress and by our Department of Justice.
And border surge. Migrants are gathering at the border in record numbers, with the COVID-era border policy known as Title 42 set to expire.
To secure our border is our responsibility.
Federal officials are now bracing for more illegal crossings.
They have ignored the problem, they have created the problem, and they have played politics with the problem.
My guests this morning, Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio and Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, who's considering a run for president in 2024. Plus, problem solving. Karen Bass, the new mayor of Los Angeles, declares a state of emergency on homelessness on her very first day in office.
It is a humanitarian crisis.
I'll talk to the mayor about her plans to break through the bureaucracy and solve this big problem in America's second largest city. Finally, the lives we lost, remembering the legends in 2022, from Queen Elizabeth and Madeleine Albright to Bernie Shaw and Sidney Poitier, and sadly many more. Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee, Politico Playbook co-author Eugene Daniels, Stephen Hayes, editor of The Dispatch, and former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
And a good Sunday morning. As we wrap up the year and prepare to enter a new one, entrenched political warfare has shifted our playing field just inches. Both parties are still struggling with the same problems they've had for the last few years. This Congress and the next one are two of the most closely divided in the past century. Republicans will have just a 10-seat majority in the House, and the Senate has moved from a 50-50 Senate controlled by Democrats via a VP tiebreaker to a 51-49 split. Not exactly a mandate for the Democrats. After a disappointing midterm cycle, Republican leaders are the ones under fire right now. The head of the Republican National Committee is mired in a bitter fight over who will lead the party. Kevin McCarthy is scrambling to get the votes he needs to be Speaker of the House, saying hardliners on the right have not moved, and it may put the agenda in jeopardy. And then there's Donald Trump, running again after losing, and in more legal trouble. A major announcement this week bordered on self-parody. It was an infomercial for digital trading cards of himself selling for $99. It was even too much for former advisor Steve Bannon to defend. Democrats, meanwhile, may have a false sense of security, acting like they won the midterms. But they did lose the House, and they did lose the popular vote. President Biden's approval rating is stuck where it was a year ago, in the low to mid-40s. In many ways, their successes of the midterms came perhaps only because of the excesses of the Trump right. This is the backdrop for the current immigration debate over the end of Title 42, the COVID-era policy that allowed officials to expel migrants from U.S. borders quickly, a crisis that has been mired in government inaction. In fact, some Democrats have criticized all of Washington for not doing more over 2 administrations.
The reality is that government has not been up to the task. Partisan politics have gotten in the way.
Who's listening to the men and women in green and blue? And more importantly, who's listening to our border communities?
I've actually written letters to the president asking him not to lift Title 42. I mean, we're still not completely out of a pandemic.
There's no question in my mind that we are not prepared for a post-Title 42 world. And we need to reconcile the fact that the federal government is not committed to comprehensive reform.
Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown is the only Democrat to win statewide in Ohio in the past decade. By the way, he did announce that he is running for a 4th term in 2024. Senator Brown, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Let me start with Title 42, and I'd like you to respond to what Governor Newsom said here, that he thinks it's pretty clear, regardless of what you think of the policy as it stands and whether it should have been used or not. Do you agree with him that essentially government's not ready for a post-Title 42 world at the border yet?
Well, quoting Chuck Todd, who 90 seconds ago said, Congress is mired in, I think you said, mired in government inaction. I think that's really the issue here, that maybe with this new Republican House and Democratic Senate, we finally get serious about immigration reform and quit demagoguing this issue by pointing fingers and say that the disaster is about to happen. I think the administration will figure this out short term, but it's clear we've got to get serious as a body, and it's going to take both parties. And instead of trying to gain on bashing immigrants or gain on appealing to new citizens, whatever, we've got to get serious about that.
Can you give me any insight? I talked with others that said Senators Sinema and Tillis were close. This sort of compromise bill, which would have finally helped created a path to legalization for DACA recipients, it would have given some new authority to DHS that was similar to Title 42. It seemed like the perfect compromise. What killed it?
No, I don't. I think it was probably looking across. I can't speak for Senator Sinema or Senator Tillis, but probably looking across the Capitol and seeing the chaos in the House right now, that even if we were able to do something in the Senate. But I appreciated their focus on DACA, on the Dreamer kids, who essentially are Americans except for the paperwork. And it's really important we focus on them first. And I mean, our national security, of course, our domestic security, but those kids have been waiting, and it's just terrible that we've not moved as a body.
Look, you brought up, I think rightfully, the issue, how it gets demagogued, the issue of immigration. I think about the state you represent, and you're going to be running for re-election in 2024. You know there's a lot of folks in the middle who are not very empathetic to what's happening at the border. How do you change the tone of that conversation to get them to accept a compromise like the one that Sinema and Tillis were trying to put together?
I think they will. I think my voters in Ohio are reasonable, and we're a slightly lean Republican state now. I don't hear a lot about immigration from voters, except people on the far right that always want to gain political advantage by talking about it. I see when serious-minded people talk to me about immigration, they're looking for something like Tom and Kirsten are suggesting. And I think that there is and they're also emphasizing the Dreamer kids, the DACA kids, who, as I said, are essentially Americans except for the paperwork.
Let me shift gears to something you're also very focused on right now, which is, as head of the Senate Banking Committee, it's what to do about crypto and what we've learned from FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. I got to play what the U.S. Attorney from the Southern District of New York said earlier this week. Let me play that for you.
I think it's fair to say that by anyone's lights, this is one of the biggest financial frauds in American history.
And a big part of this financial fraud is how much, frankly, Sam Bankman-Fried, his executives, FTX, took advantage of political parties' hunger for campaign contributions and essentially used political donations to create the illusion of credibility for what many people think is a Ponzi scheme. I know probably where your head is on this, but my goodness, that's a huge vulnerability in our system, is it not?
Of course it is. And too much money in politics, too much unreported cash in politics. But FTX is only one huge part, but one part of this problem. You originally said I chair the Banking Committee. When I took over almost 2 years ago as chair, it was called the Banking Committee because it essentially was the committee for Wall Street. And the whole name, Banking, Housing, Urban Affairs, we have aggressively taken on Wall Street. This committee's about housing. It's about public transit, what we've done in small towns and big cities in my state and around the country. And we had our 6th hearing on crypto to educate the public about its dangers, not just the Ponzi scheme that you talk about, and not just the lack of consumer protection or regulation, but also the threat to national security, from Korean cyber criminals to drug trafficking and human trafficking and financing of terrorism and all the things that can come out of crypto. So we've got to do this right. I have already gone to Secretary of the Treasury as sort of the lead economics person in the administration, ask her to do a government-wide assessment through all the various regulatory agencies. SEC is particularly aggressive, and we need to move forward that way and legislatively if it comes to that. But I've spent much of the last year and a half in this job as chair of the Banking, Housing, Urban Affairs Committee, educating my colleagues and trying to educate the public about crypto and the dangers that it presents to our security as a nation and to consumers that get hoodwinked by them.
Are you at all concerned that if government decides crypto should be regulated, it's actually giving a green light to something that maybe some folks ought to be banned? Senator Tester isn't sure it should be legal.
Yeah, I share that thought. I think, though, that what we need to do now is, as I said, get Treasury to get all the different agencies. The agencies so far that have stepped up the most are Gensler at SEC and Russ Baum at the Commodities Future Trading Commission. That's a more narrow jurisdiction he has. But we want them to do what they need to do at the same time. Maybe banning it, although banning it is very difficult because it will go offshore and who knows how that will work. So this is a complicated, unregulated pot of money. It's been in so many ways. I mean, the Sam Bankman-Fried was at one point worth, they said, $30 billion, and now he's worth probably less than zero and may very well face jail time. But but FTX is not the whole issue. That's what the focus started in our committee, but we really broadened it to discuss all the other and every other nook and cranny in our economy where these people rear their heads.
Let me ask you a couple political questions. Do you think the Democratic Party should support Senator Kyrsten Sinema's reelection bid in 2024?
Well, she has said she's not in the Democratic Party. I assume a Democrat will run for that seat, and then it plays out. I'm less interested and focused on Arizona politics than I am my own, and I know what we need to do in Ohio to win, and a message, not a workers are on the agenda, but workers are the agenda. And I think if our party would focus on that a little more, we'd win more seats.
That final question is, why do you think you're going to be able to find 50% plus one in the state of Ohio? Your good friend Tim Ryan came up short. It's a state that feels like it continues to drift to the right here than even when you were on the ballot in 2018.
Well, I won by 7 points. Last two elections, I won by 6 and then 7 points. I win because I focus on workers. I look at the last 18 months as huge accomplishments. What we did with Senator Portman on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the strongest Buy America provisions ever in federal law. What we did on the PACT Act to help those veterans with 23 different diagnosed illnesses will get coverage. Those veterans exposed in Iraq and Afghanistan to those football field-sized burn pits. The Inflation Reduction Act, taking on drug companies. I mean, this was a year and a half of great accomplishments. I'll take those home. The voters overwhelmingly support, I believe, all of those positions that we took in issues we passed to deliver, not to mention the child tax credit, not to mention 100,000 Ohio union members have had their pensions protected, and all of those things. I know that sounds like campaign speech, but you asked for it, Chuck. That's how I'll win.
In fairness, I did. I asked a campaign question, so I'm going to get a campaign answer. Finally, let me ask you about what we expect to hear from the January 6th committee tomorrow, making formal criminal referrals to the Justice Department. Do you think that's necessary? Do you think that that's helpful or hurtful to what the Justice Department is currently doing with the former president and January 6th?
I'm not a lawyer, but you follow the law and you follow the evidence, and it's pretty clear that the congressman from Mississippi and the congresswoman from Wyoming have done both of those things, and the others on the committee of both parties, the Republican from Illinois, the Democrat from California, all of them from Maryland. And so I support what they're doing. I think they've shown courage. They've stood up in some cases to their own political party and stood up to a president who has clearly flouted or worse the law. So I applaud their efforts.
Senator Brown, before I let you go, are you guys going to be able to pass a budget before Christmas, or are you coming back between Christmas and New Year's to wrap things up?
No, we're coming back Monday. We'll finish in the next few days, and the country will be better off because we've done it right.
Well, I hope the sake for all of your families that you are able to get home for Christmas. Senator Brown, Appreciate you coming on and sharing your views, and enjoy the holiday season. And joining me now for some perspective from the other side of the aisle is Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who is serving his final days as governor, a successful two-term that he has had there. Governor Hutchinson, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you, Chuck. Great to be with you this morning.
Let me start with something the Wall Street Journal editorialized about this weekend. And they're very frustrated watching the House Republicans and, frankly, Senate Republicans not work very well with House Republicans. And they write this: the GOP dysfunction since Election Day won't matter if it teaches Republicans that their only chance of influencing policy is to stay united. On the evidence so far, however, Republicans are the gang that couldn't shoot straight, except at one another. Do you disagree with anything they wrote there?
Well, I certainly agree that the Republican Party has got to come together. One, to elect a speaker. The American people put the Republicans in charge of the House. We have to operate as a team. We're expected to unite together as Republicans on House and Senate. So absolutely, that point is well taken. We have to come together to be successful. And then secondly, we've got to stop focusing on each other within our caucus or our party, and let's focus on the failures of the Biden administration, which we're about to see once again when Title 42 is lifted. So we've got an immigration crisis. We've got challenges with our economy that's not going to change in the short term. And so that's what we've got to focus on.
Look, you've actually had to deal with a similar problem at times, even in your state. There's a small faction in your party that seems to have outsized influence. You see it at the RNC. We're seeing it in the speaker's fight for Kevin McCarthy. We're even seeing it with a challenge to Senator McConnell. There's sort of 2/3 of the party does sort of speak with the same voice you're speaking with, but 1/3 seems to hold the rest of them hostage. Why is that?
Well, sometimes we fail in leadership, and so Republicans' leadership should not be listening simply to the loudest voice in the room because it is a minority, because it might be extreme. And so let's get back to working for middle America. That's leadership. That's not yielding. And so where you look at Kevin McCarthy, he's got to win just simply because you can't yield to that loudest voice that's disruptive, that could bring our party in terms of the strength of our House leadership down. And so you got to be strong. And whenever I ran, I had somebody with a loud voice that ran against me for re-election in the primary, and I won with 70% of the vote. That means 30%, close to it, didn't like the views that I had, but that's the majority that we won with, and we were able to accomplish a great deal with that. That's how we have to lead as Republicans.
I know. Can you imagine trying that you couldn't take office unless you had 100% of the Republican Party supporting you before you could take office? That's what Kevin McCarthy is facing, isn't it?
Well, it is, and we have a diverse party, and you have to embrace the diversity, but at the same time, you get, if you're not going to operate as a team on certain fundamental levels, like being able to elect the leader of our party in the House, then we're failing the American people. And so we have to come together so we can then get the important work done of looking at the border security issue, to looking at controlling federal spending that's adding to inflation, and also enforcing the rule of law, which the failure to do that is leading to crime in our streets and really a lack of confidence in public safety. These are the fundamental issues that we're good at. And we just need to get through the leadership part, and we'll be effective next year on this.
Look, you're thinking about running for president in 2024, and if you become the nominee, you're the leader of the party. And I'm curious, if you were leader of the party right now, how would you deal with somebody who says the following? And I want to play this piece of sound from Marjorie Taylor Greene from just a week ago.
If Steve Bannon and I had organized that, we would have won. Not to mention, it would have been armed.
That was Marjorie Taylor Greene making light of January 6th, basically saying, hey, if Steve Bannon and her were in charge, it would have been a more armed insurrection. She's becoming quite influential in your party. What do you do?
You know, the first thing is that you win on the ideas and the Constitution. And so you don't back away from going to the same audience that she does and say, January 6th was a serious affront to our democracy, and we have to treat that seriously. And we can't defend what happened on that day. And we stand up for the Constitution. And so I've always gone to those tough audiences, explained that, and guess what? They listen. And there's always some that disagree, but you've got to win in the marketplace of ideas. And as a leader of the party, that's what you've got to do.
Well, it's funny you bring it up that way because you spent a lot of 2021 trying to get some skeptics to take the vaccine in Arkansas. So I'm curious what you think of what Governor DeSantis is now doing down there. He has changed his view on vaccine over the last year. Let me show the audience that.
My message is the vaccines protect you. Get vaccinated.
Like anything, I mean, you take an mRNA shot, and the way to view it is, okay, what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks? And it seems like our medical establishment never wanted to be honest with people about the potential drawbacks.
Florida governor is leaning into vaccine skepticism at a time when I know health officials are trying to get people to take these boosters so that we can prevent the 300 deaths a day that we're still averaging in America. You have any thoughts?
Well, we shouldn't undermine science. We shouldn't undermine the medical community that's very important to our public health. And whenever you look at how I handled the pandemic in Arkansas, we didn't have mandates of government forcing people to take the vaccine, but I did go out into the communities and I had the medical experts there educating them as to how this is beneficial and how this is important. And I had local community doctors addressing that. So I think we are not good as a society. It's not the right direction. If we diminish the facts, we diminish all the best information that we have from science at the time. And sure, during the pandemic, things changed from time to time. We had more information, so we had to adjust, and that's what leaders do. But I don't think it's good to go back, whether you're going back to the 2020 election or whether you're going back and trying to relitigate everything that happened during the pandemic. That's not helpful for where we are, and we do need to make sure we get the protection, whether it's a flu shot or whether it's a COVID vaccine. Everybody makes their decision, but I'm for the education and the science behind it.
It wouldn't be Meet the Press if I didn't try to pinpoint when you're going to tell us you're running for president. So tell me this, what is your timeline, and what would make you decide not to run for president?
Well, the timeline would be I finished January 10th after 2 terms as governor of Arkansas. I can focus at that point more on the future. The fact that President Trump has already announced accelerates everyone's time frame. And so the first quarter of next year, you either need to be in or out. And of course, an important factor is not what President Trump is doing necessarily, but what's the level of support out there. And that's important to know. And so we've got some work to do, but I expect a decision to be made the first part of next year.
All right. Governor Hutchinson, I hope you have a Merry Christmas, enjoy the holiday season, and if you get out on the campaign trail, be safe out there, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Chuck. Great to be with you.
You got it. When we come back, the January 6th committee is considering criminal referrals for former President Donald Trump. It's something that has never happened to any former president. Panel is here. Back now with the panel, NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee, Politico Playbook co-author Eugene Daniels, former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards, and Stephen Hayes, editor of The Dispatch. All right, guys, I want to start with the news that we expect tomorrow, the potential criminal referrals from the January 6th committee. Let me put up some, the January 6th committee by the numbers, as we like to call it around here. They've had 10 public hearings so far. Tomorrow will be number 11. There's been over 100 known subpoenas that we've been able to confirm. They've done over 1,000 interviews and or depositions. Some of them, of course, were just interviews and not technically depositions. And, of course, they've had hundreds of thousands of documents that have been examined, and now we expect 3 criminal referrals. Eugene Daniels, it's your news organization that broke the news about all 3 criminal referrals. How significant will this moment be tomorrow? Because we don't think it's going to be that influential on the Justice Department. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the fact that we've never seen this in this country before, right? We've never seen members of Congress put out a report and refer charges to the Justice Department for a former president of the United States. And I think that's really important. But also, you know, it seems more likely than not that they're going to do this, that's going to be a part of that document. Right now it's still in there, 3 different types of charges that they're thinking of referring, and you still have members of the committee going out doing interviews, calling Donald Trump guilty. The 3 things those 3 charges, they spent a lot of time during the committee hearings talking about those and trying to prove, and they feel like they have proven that he did those. And then when you look at the actual chapter titles that are that have been in the drafts, 7 of the 8, Trump's name is in them, so it is squarely focused on him. And so I think it's more likely than not that they're going to do it. The effect of it, we still don't know.
Carol Lee, we expect that this committee is not going to present themselves as divided. Whatever they present to publicly is going to be pretty unanimous. Does that make it more impactful?
Well, potentially, Chuck, and they've really gone to great lengths to try to stay unified. And one of the things that would be different about this in terms of the charges that they're looking at is insurrection. If they recommended criminal charges on insurrection for former President Trump, it's worth noting that none of the Capitol rioters who've been charged with crimes that hasn't been among the charges. So that would be pretty new and additionally significant. Now, how it resonates with the American public just remains to be seen. I can tell you from the White House's perspective, they're going to really try to distance themselves from this, punt to DOJ, stay above it and away from it as much as they can. And yet, this is something that really benefits the president's message. I mean, just this week, he was touting his record to Democrats, the White House was, and one of those things is his efforts to restore the soul of the nation. So there's not going to be an embrace of it, at least from the White House, but they could see the benefits playing out in this, and they'll punt it to DOJ.
Steve Hayes, what does this do inside the GOP? I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who like to see Trump go, but they can't get caught celebrating Trump being seen as a criminal.
Well, I think the committee itself did a lot of the hard work already. I mean, if you look at the way that the committee handled itself, they left no doubt whatsoever that Donald Trump knew that what he was saying about the election being stolen was false. I think the committee expanded in a pretty dramatic way how much information the public had on that and how much information Republican lawmakers had on that. The second thing they did was by telling the story through Republican witnesses, they in effect gave political cover to elected Republicans who were frankly too cowardly to speak out against Donald Trump. You had Trump loyal Republicans, people who had devoted their career to serving alongside Donald Trump or serving with Donald Trump, making this case for them. I think the committee's job to this point was to say it's time to hold people accountable, and they're going to turn it over to other entities to actually hold people accountable.
And Donna, this will be perceived pressure on the Justice Department. Is that a fair way to read it?
Well, I think it's going to be an important marker for the Department of Justice that referrals coming from Congress directly to them really compels the Department of Justice to the extent that it wasn't acting. And frankly, I think the Department of Justice is acting, but will give them, I think, more leverage to continue their investigations. The important thing is, though, that this is coming from Congress. This is the People's House, saying that they believe that there has been some criminal behavior, and I think that's important for the American public to hear.
I want to shift slightly here. It's going to be an interesting week. By the end of the week, Carol Lee, we expect to hear from the president on a bigger picture, sort of where things stand. And yet, what a week we're going to have. We're going to have these criminal referrals. You're going to have the end of Title 42, which will bring its own set of challenges. What is this a victory lap speech we expect from the president?
Well, Chuck, I'm told that the president's going to speak to the American people before the end of the week, before the Christmas holiday, and really just outline what he sees as his accomplishments over this first 2 years in office, to hit the notes of unity and bipartisanship, to try to set the table for some of the benefits that are in some of the legislation that he signed that are is going to take effect in the new year. And so it was described to me as not necessarily a victory lap, but more of a celebration in the holiday spirit. But look, this is far different from where they were a year ago in this White House, where Democrats were infighting. The president's agenda seemed dead. And now the FDR comparisons, when you talk to White House officials, they are back. And this all comes ahead of a potential 2024 announcement in the early new year, Chuck.
Donna, I'm just curious, do you hear any rumblings now about challenges to Joe Biden inside the party? It seems like they've disappeared.
I don't. I think that they have, and a good thing. I mean, I think it's important as Democrats go into a divided Congress for there to be unity in the party, and that's what you're hearing. And I think until or unless Joe Biden makes another decision, you will not hear anything coming from Democrats. Yeah. They are going to stand united against Republicans going into this next Congress, and that is going to be the platform from which Joe Biden will be able to jump.
And for what it's worth, it's my understanding this holiday season, when they make the decision, if it's a go or whatever it is, we're going to know early. They're not going to delay telling the American people. Up next, on her first day in office, she declared a state of emergency over her city's homeless population. I'm going to talk to the new mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, about her plans for running America's second largest city. Welcome back. In a recent survey of America's mayors, representing 126 sitting mayors at the time, 73% of the leaders of America's cities said they are held highly accountable for homelessness. But only 19% said they have a lot of control over the problem. New Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass wants to change that. The first female mayor after 241 years, mind you, of America's second largest city. She was sworn in on Sunday, and she began her term at the city's Emergency Operations Center rather than at City Hall. She explains.
In Los Angeles, 40,000 people sleeping on the street every day. I believe that times of inflection require reflection. And I believe it's time for Angelenos to remind ourselves where we come from and who we are. My first act as mayor will be to declare a state of emergency on homelessness.
And joining me now from Los Angeles is the former member of Congress and VP shortlister to Joe Biden, by the way, the new mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass. Mayor Bass, congratulations, and welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
I want to start with what this is what's going to be different this time. And what I mean by this time is in 2015, this was pre-pandemic, obviously, Eric Garcetti declared a version of a state of emergency, not quite the same as what you declared. Yours is a bit more comprehensive. But it freed up $100 million and tried to tackle the homeless problem that he was dealing with back in 2015. It didn't work. What's going to make what you're doing more successful than what Mayor Garcetti attempted to do?
Well, I think a few things. First of all, it's not just about the money. Of course, money is needed, but it's really about the arcane bureaucratic process. You talk to developers and it's just so difficult to get anything done. So when I declared a state of emergency and issued following executive directives, it basically allows the process to be centralized. It allows time certain for building. Chuck, the other day I did a press conference on a piece of land where the builder had been working for 16 years and it just finally broke ground. So it's about bursting past the bureaucratic maze and developers having no idea when approvals will be done. So now I'm requiring that approvals and the process be moved within 30 to 60 days.
There's a few issues that have people run into all the time when it comes to dealing with homeless in the cities. The biggest one is, what do you do about people that don't want to leave, that don't want to move, that don't want to go into shelters?
Well, you know, what we have found in the community organizations that we're bringing in to do this work is that you can get 95% of the people housed. people will go. It takes a while. You have to do outreach. And what the community programs do is that they work with people who were formerly unhoused. People are unhoused for a variety of different reasons. Some are profoundly mentally ill. Some are profoundly addicted. You have to address the reasons why they wound up unhoused while you house them. So we're going to launch a program on Tuesday called Inside Safe, which is going to address the people that are in the tents. Now, it's not going to address everybody, but it is going to address, hopefully, a significant number. But we're going to put them in motels and hotels immediately. It's interesting. It's lessons that were learned from the pandemic. Some community organizations have been trying to get the city to master lease out entire hotels and motels for years.
Are you still going to allow LAPD and sanitation officers to do these sweeps of encampments?
No, these are not sweeps at all. This is getting people to move on their own. But then after the person leaves, sanitation is absolutely going to have to be there. No question about it. But this is not coercing people. This is not ticketing people or incarcerating people. This is moving people from tents to hotels or motels.
And we know some of this is we know that you run across quite a bit of mental health challenges here with the homeless population. Mayor Adams in New York City is talking about temporary institutions to help on those with mental health problems. Do you think we need to bring some institutions like that into play to help you in Los Angeles?
Well, let me just say that one of our challenges in LA is the division between the city and the county. The county provides the services. We're doing this process jointly, so we know that the people on the street, again, there's not enough services, but there will be some. But in the state of California, the legislature passed something, too, that says if somebody is profoundly mentally ill, they can be hospitalized.
I'm curious, you talk about the issues you have with developers. The biggest issue the city sometimes has when it comes to tackling these housing issues are these homeowners associations. They're extraordinarily litigious and extraordinarily powerful. Does your emergency declaration give you any more authority in dealing with these powerful institutions or not?
Well, it does give me more authority to do that, but I do think that there's a way to get neighborhoods to cooperate. This problem is so severe in our city. I mean, literally 5 people a day die on our streets. It's so severe that I think that some of the resistance that we've experienced in the past, I'm hoping will be softened. So there's some neighborhoods that want building to be built in certain areas, but it is still within their general neighborhood. You cannot address 40,000 people without building housing everywhere. You can't just build all of the housing in the low-income areas that are already severely overcrowded.
All right, before I let you go, give me a metric which you should be judged in 4 years on the homeless situation. Is it number of people on the streets, number of tent encampments? What's a fair way to judge your success or failure?
Well, a fair way to judge it would be encampment should be significantly down, if not eliminated, and there should be housing being built underway at a much more rapid pace, and there should not be 40,000 people who are unhoused, that's for sure.
Mayor Karen Bass, I appreciate you getting up super early out on the West Coast to share your perspective with us. Good luck, congratulations, and we'll be following your progress.
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to look back at the lives we lost this year. Welcome back. As we do every year, we want to take a moment to remember and reflect and celebrate some of the iconic people in politics, culture, and the media whom we lost in the last 12 months.
I didn't make it in life because of my athletic prowess. I didn't make it because of my good looks. I didn't make it because I'm a genius. I made it because I worked hard.
I have not found that being a woman is a handicap. In fact, I've found it a terrific gender to be.
We must restore the culture of comedy, compromise, and mutual respect that used to exist here.
No institution, city, monarchy, whatever, should expect to be free from the scrutiny of those who give it their loyalty and support, not to mention those who don't.
See, I never, ever considered myself as a leader or anything like that. One thing I wanted to make sure, that I never did anything that my father would be ashamed of.
I arrived in Hollywood at the age of 22 in a time different than today's, a time in which the odds against my standing here tonight, 53 years later, would not have fallen in my favor.
We are back. One of the odder moments of the week was when the former president, Donald Trump, teased everybody about a major announcement, and it turned out to be this.
Hello, everyone. This is Donald Trump, hopefully your favorite president of all time, better than Lincoln, better than Washington, with an important announcement to make. I'm doing my first official Donald J. Trump NFT collection right here and right now. They're called Trump Digital Trading Cards.
So if that made you uncomfortable, you're not alone. Here's Steve Bannon.
He's one of the greatest presidents in history, but I got to tell you, whoever, what business partner, and anybody in the comms team, and anybody in Mar-a-Lago, and I love the folks down there, but we're at war. They ought to be fired today.
Steve Hayes, when it's too much for Seb Gorka and Steve Bannon, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, better than Lincoln, better than Washington. It's a bit rich for the people who have been in on the grift to now call it a grift, right? I think what they're probably most upset about is that they're no longer getting their cut. Look, I think that if you're surprised by this at this point, you haven't been paying attention to the last 7 years. But I think it's the kind of thing that ought to remind Republicans that every time they make a compromise with Donald Trump, either on a policy issue or by backing him when they know that they shouldn't, it's not a temporary pass to get you beyond this immediate moment. It's tying you deeper to somebody who would do something like this and claim in what appeared to be a serious argument that he's a better president than Abraham Lincoln and George Washington.
Eugene Daniels, I know we go here all the time, and it's, this is it, this is the beginning of the end, but my word, seriously?
I mean, this is, for weeks and weeks, Republicans have been seriously starting to back away from Donald Trump. We've seen it show up in polling. I think they were fine with kind of like the drama and these weird kinds of things when they were winning. Since the midterms, that's not been the case, right? You have Republicans looking forward and saying, we're not even winning and we're still getting dragged and all of those types of things. So I think, we've been here before. In 2016 when he was running, during his presidency many times, after the election and after January 6th. So, I would caution everybody, including myself, to think that the Republican Party is going to move away because it's going to take an actual head-on collision between one of these folks who are thinking about running, including Governor Hutchinson, who you had on earlier, with Donald Trump to really make the Republicans move away from him.
I do want to point out, though, Carol Lee, I'm going to put up this headline from the New York Post. Rupert Murdoch is calling Donald Trump a con artist. Of course, so did Marco Rubio at one point during the 2016 campaign. But this could be the breaking point for some.
So, look, Chuck, I'm talking to Trump supporters over the weekend, including Republicans who are also close to Governor DeSantis in Florida. The feeling is that there was a lot of excitement around the former president, when he first announced. And since then, his supporters just can't find him. And one Republican said to me, imagine you're a Trump supporter and you want information about him. Where do you go? And furthermore, imagine you're a Republican and you're looking for a leader. Who is it? There aren't a lot of options. It's not like Kevin McCarthy has people really excited, for instance. And so you see Governor DeSantis filling a void. And what's happening there is then you see him taking these positions where he's trying to get to the right of Trump on vaccines, for instance. And that's something that the former president's team has really taken notice of. I mean, that's how they see this. And yet still, there are no plans for him to do the things that his supporters say they want, which is big rallies and things like that. He's still very much expected to do these smaller events focused on policy. And so people say that this is something he could turn around, but if it doesn't, he has himself to blame.
All right. Unfortunately, I have to leave it there. That's all we have for today. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week, even on Christmas, because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.